Hi everyone, thanks a lot for having me here. I'm going to talk to you guys about, although I'm on the 5G and cloud stage, I'm going to talk a lot about experiences. And the real reason for that is that technology is there. What I want to talk about are some of the use cases and outcomes that we can drive from it, which I think are very interesting. And obviously you could see one of them in the previous session around how 5G and cloud is helping forestry around that as well. So, starting with experiences, I think it's important to understand that experiences define perspectives. And I'll start with a story on how that reflects on me personally as well. So it goes this way. There's a guy driving on a road, in a desert, empty road, and he sees a car standing on the side. And obviously he sees, okay, it's concerning. It may be someone who needs some help. He stops and he tries to see, okay, if there's someone in the car, he can help, and he doesn't see anyone. As he gets closer, he hears some really heavy breathing in the boot of the car, and obviously he gets more concerned. There must be someone who needs help. He opens the boot up and he sees a guy dazed and saying, "Sorry, sir, please, I've got kids." The person says, "Don't worry, I'm here to help you." And the guy says, "No, you don't understand. I've got kids. Please let me finish my nap." and that's me personally. So I have a father of three kids. That actually drives a lot of behavior and what I think about experiences. Also personally, the amount of value put in interactions, not just with your kids at home, but also organizations when you're the customer going out. If I'm going to stand in a queue, if I'm going to call someone, if I'm going to log onto their website, what value am I getting back? Because I'm actually spending time on that, whereas I could have either spent with my family or napping, right? So there's a lot of value that people put on those interactions nowadays. From a professional life, if you look at partners, looking at delivering different aspects of that value chain, there's lots of different perspectives as well. Coming from vendors, and I've been very fortunate to have been able to work on different areas of the market, whether that's a vendor, actual financial services, tech managed service, and GSIs. Each one of these partners are trying to play a different part in trying to get those outcomes and those experiences. Now, those experiences come down to two sides, right? There's the customer side, and there's most of the organizations are driven by employees. We've not yet reached the stage where you don't need employees for an organization, but our employees are a key asset for organizations. And because of the pandemic, there's a lot of focus on the experience of the employees, which is as important as it drives the experience of a customer. There are lots of opportunities, and you can think, are they challenges or are they opportunities? If you look at customers, 4 out of 5, and this is very consistent across the board, the service experience is key. Your product may be the best, it may be the cheapest, but if the service isn't there, you will be disrupted by other competitors. When you look at the expectation from clients as well, it's even more difficult because every customer or client expects you to understand the context of where that interaction or that experience is that they're expecting from you. And because of the fast pace and the real dynamic nature of these client behaviors, it's very difficult for organizations to really understand that context in this ever complex environment. So there's a bit of challenge there for organizations to address that. Obviously with digital enablement, the client could actually be consuming your service through digital channels or physical, and you need to be following them to create that context. So again, there's obviously a lot of opportunity, but there's challenges in being able to deliver that. And as I said, from a personal perspective as well, what value they expect back from that interaction. There's a huge focus on what are you giving back to that client and them interacting with you and delivering their service. When you look at the employee side, there's a lot of gap in terms of the value and the challenge. Employees, there's a huge amount of skills gap there. And I think there's a statistic in the next 5 to 10 years, about 50% of the skilled workforce is going to retire. So there's a huge amount of knowledge that's walking out the door, but also there's in the fast pace of customers looking at their journeys, they're expecting a lot in every interaction. So you need to have access to the right knowledge at the right time. but also in the digital channels. There's so many different channels, whether that's WhatsApp, whether that's Zoom, whether that's the e-commerce store, or even physical and hybrid. There's so many different digital channels that those clients can come in from. The employees end up really jumping around and trying to just use the tool that the client's using. Now, working around sometimes your own corporate policies and losing data and security and etc. But they have to do that to deliver the service. So there's a lot of challenge around that. And if you look at the industry perspective of that as well, which is the previous, if you look at customer employee, that's more of a generic one. If you look at industries, the price and just the competitive product isn't enough. When you look at research and medical, the speed to response is really critical nowadays. You need to be able to get the right expertise at the right time. Think about the constraints on the NHS at the moment, right? The front line being really pushed to deliver the outcomes where the expertise are really getting thinned out in how they are spread far and wide. If you look at manufacturing, the cost to serve is a big element, not just to optimize the price and to deliver the right service quickly, but also to make sure they're using the right supply chain more optimally as well, because of all the bottlenecks that are there right now. Right now, at the moment, if you're in a manufacturing and a logistics service call, 1 in 3 will cause a truck roll. And if you look at the cost on that, each individual truck roll will cost anywhere between $200 to $1,400. That's a huge cost in that interaction that you need to make sure you reduce. If you look at public sector and the local government, if you look at citizen services, there's huge focus on making sure that your field is empowered and they can deliver services rather than just being the face of your organization. How do you deliver on that? And then again, if you look at the skills I mentioned previously, well, there's a huge amount of skills that are just about to retire, but 1 in 3 are actually looking to change as well, this whole great resignation. How do you make sure you create a good, seamless experience for your employees so they stick around, but also they deliver the right value for your clients as well? And I think the complexity that creates on the two sides, the client and the customer side and their own assets, employees I would count in as assets or an organization, it's really about workflows. How do you make sure you connect the two things together the most optimal way? And if you think about the real drivers from clients and employees, the real thing that we're seeing emerging now is this focus on not just a generic customer and employee experience, it's about the service experience. I would think of it as a platform. It's a platform how you can create context of that interaction and the information for those clients, but also empowering the front line, the systems and the assets, but also creating the most optimal workflows around that. There's a huge amount of data that's out there, and there's other sessions today talking about data and how you can make use of that. But how do you make sure you create the context from that data and really create some leverage from it in getting the right outcomes at the right time for those frontline use cases, for users? The technological challenges from there are obvious, right? How do you create that context and also the visual aspect? Visual gives you a huge amount of context already. How do you make sure you get that? And there's obviously technological gaps in the past and how you can create context from a visual scenario. But when you talk about data, how do you transport that huge amount of data in real time, whether that's visual telemetry or metadata that you're trying to make use of in real time? That obviously is a great challenge. But when you talk about compute, because data has to be computed, the workflows need compute, there's not just one compute that rules them all. There are different computes and different cloud power that you can leverage. How do you make sure you can access the most optimal one for the right thing rather than just trying to go for cloud every time? And obviously trying to make sure you create a consistency in terms of scale and coverage in delivering that service. You can't really differentiate a customer in London where 5G is pervasive compared to Sherwood Forest, right? If there's someone who wants to experience that from there, you need to be consistent, and that consistent experience is really key. Now, obviously, there are technological advances that are addressing some of these challenges. AR and AI has really got to a point where the engines have been really driven and they're efficient enough that they can drive AI based context on visuals, and they can also facilitate frontline users in not just being able to use the right information at the right time, having an app, scanning a device or a router or a technical device to recognize, okay, this is what we're working against, and oh, by the way, this is what the AI tool tells you is possibly wrong, or maybe instructing them. The challenge also is, how do you get that data to them at the right quickly? And you talk about extensibility, because one app itself isn't going to give them the solution. There you have to connect huge amounts of different applications, and the extensibility is really important. And with the extensibility standards and how you can make sure there are predictable outcomes and how you stitch them together. 5G and cloud really helps, because not just in terms of the bandwidth and just transferring that amount of data, but 5G, I would say, really facilitates the edge cloud concept as well. Every 5G tower is effectively a data center. So when, for example, you're talking about creating visual context, and the way you can actually create a hybrid solution in bringing some of the applications that are latency sensitive and more data consuming, that you can bring those in a seamless manner into the edge, close to the user in real time in some ways, versus some of the engines that need to be driven on huge amounts of data in the background. How you can create that hybrid is really where it's starting to bring these solutions to real life, and rather than just a lab experiment. So 5G, I would say, is a real enabler in how bringing these solutions to life. And I think it's not going to be a single touch solution and away you go. There's different aspects of this ecosystem of solution that you bring in. And I think what I really want to emphasize is looking at not just the extensibility of the application, but also the value chain. I understand there are lots of partners here today as well, and there's value you can bring to each part of this ecosystem, whether that's just the ability to bring your assets from the telecom perspective in demonstrating 5G and the traditional network convergence and making sure 5G is pervasive, but also driving the hybrid cloud and edge cloud concepts in those assets. Service integrators and how they can leverage extensibility and stitch the solutions together in a consistent manner, and being able to drive some consistent use cases. The operate of these solutions is becoming more complex, and working with organizations who have expertise they can leverage to operate in the right optimal manner. That's also very important. But I think one of the most important aspects is how you can create some business value out of these solutions, because it is not about just creating a good tech. Working with the business in creating sound business cases that can actually deliver this on the front line and really deliver short-term gains as you grow through as well. Because if you look through the ecosystem, there's a huge amount of assets being leveraged in investment, but you need to demonstrate return to these organizations as you would demonstrate to your clients in delivering these returns. So business value and actual consulting it's really important there. But also I think adoption of that technology, adoption not just from a organization and your employees, and then making sure that they've got the right tools and they've trained and they've got the right skills to leverage those tools, but adoption on the front line in the client and the customer side as well, to make sure that these tools stitch into the client journey seamlessly, rather than forcing them to jump from what would be quite natural for a client to go through in a journey to another app just because you want them to. The clients will follow if it makes sense, and you need to make sure you look at the client journey and stitch these solutions together. And obviously the SaaS solutions and the improvement there is really the enabler, right? It wouldn't be there if those solutions weren't brought in place today. Huge amounts of development being done with providers like ServiceNow and solutions around augmented reality in companies like CareAR, where they're looking at augmenting not just the remote assistance, but also recognizing what that device is and giving some instruct real time, but also training people as well in a more simulated manner, so you're a bit more efficient in solving that. Really empowering that field, where that field is becoming really important. So I think overall, at the end of the day, recognize this value end to end and contributing the bits and pieces around the value chain is important, but also working collaboratively together to create those business outcomes and those business cases to try and create those use cases. And there are lots of them in the market today, but I think what's missing at the moment is that cross-industry pollination of, okay, this is where it's really worked. How can we take that idea and test it and actually implement in other industries? So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity there, but I think huge amount of growth expected in the future as well. So I think that's it for me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just in regards to the value chain, I'm interested in terms of, from your perspective, in terms of how the services you provide. Because say if you've got a bunch of people involved, you've got like multiple people involved in this chain, but there's one company or there's one, sort of, let's say it's a service, software service provider or whatever, whoever it might be within this circle that's not playing ball. I mean, how do you manage that process in terms of, I mean, is it a case of kind of, you have like a sort of a project team where everyone's involved and you try and bring them all together in one place to sort these things out? And how do you manage that kind of situation?
I think the first and foremost, it's important to understand when you're recognizing the value chain and understanding the people that contribute to that is the culture and your long-term strategy or ethos of why you exist. Organizations need to gel together to make sure they're focusing on that same challenge. And you need to make sure you recognize that, because opposing strategies or opposing goals in the long term will obviously create friction. So I think first of all, understanding that you're all working towards that same goal is very important. Second of all, understanding, okay, let's break it down. Let's understand the customer challenge that we're looking to solve as well before we bring in other elements as well. That's also very important, top and center, just putting that on the board and always remembering what we're trying to achieve. Because obviously, all of these organizations, they have different modes of working, different operating margins and how they can bring and leverage investment, and also the types of clients that they bring in. But I think it's really important to understand the goals and objectives top and center, but also there are the frameworks out there where you can break the problem down into different aspects. And there's no one person who can solve it together. I think understanding that overall, but also leveraging your key assets and understanding what you contribute to that, and for the others to understand why you're at that table as well, really makes it a bit more homogenous in the way the expectations are clear and who's bringing. Because I think at the end of the day, if you're trying to force someone to do something that they can't, or something that their organization isn't built to do, or they're not strategically aimed at solving, that you're working cross purposes. So really, when we look at the agenda and the framework at the beginning, it's really important to understand and create that goal and the customer challenge for front and center. And that's why I've emphasized that business case really a lot, because you need to do some work there before starting a project and investing on technology. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, very well explained, very well explained. And I guess the way I posed that was also a little bit sort of that potentially, if they're raising an issue whilst it may seem like a negative thing, it actually could be perfectly valid, and maybe even in addressing that, it might protect everyone. So I suppose it's not just a case of being difficult, I'm just trying to find my notes, so forgive me. Does anyone have a question in the audience at all? Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, I'm Swapnil Kulkarni. I'm from Tata Consultancy Services. My question is that you very nicely explained the partner value chain. With the evolve of the 5G and the AR, VR and the other, or maybe the Meta, from the service experience perspective, overall, are there any paradigm shifts happening which we need to cater to, and everybody needs to take care of that so that we meet that 360-degree from the customer's perspective, because their perceptions, their expectations are changing in this new world, especially addressing millennials and all. So any of your views?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And service experience isn't a new concept, as you said. But the difference is, in the past, service experience was focused on the back office, ITSM, and just engineering in the background, how you log tickets, how you optimize the operation of an organization. Whereas where it's shifting now is actually extending that more towards the customers and the employees. So you're extending that capability on how you're enabling that front line, how you're creating that customer journey and really getting the data to optimize what those services are. And then similarly on your employee side as well. I'm taking a very generic term, employee, because obviously there's field, there's research, and there are different personas and profiles that you can look at. And I think that's where it's important, because creating profiles of users to make sure you give them the right capability is one thing that's happening more, but also the industry focus on these outcomes as well. Whereas in the past, they were very generic technological solutions like ITSM. It's a very generic solution. Now there's a lot of focus on creating some specific outcomes for working on specific industries, which starts bringing it closer to the customers and their real pain point as well. So that's the kind of paradigm shift that I see happening. But obviously, there's a lot of learning to be had, and there's a lot of evolution that needs to happen there as well. So, hope that answers your question.
We just got a couple of virtual questions coming in. So just in regards to the impact of COVID on the relevance of this service and such technology enablers, can you just talk about sort of how COVID has affected this realm? Or did
it's accelerated, if nothing else, right? So if I talk about, for example, augmented reality, a service engineer attending a site at the moment, whereas in the past you would expect 5 BT engineers to make a visit in a week's time. During COVID, you struggled to even get one because of all the challenges around COVID. So there was more expected from that engineer for something to fix that issue. And even before that, there was a lot of expectation from those users saying, I know how to use a phone. I know how to use Zoom. I can use video. If you need to look at the router and figure out where that cable goes, I can tell you that. I can probably give you access. So there's a lot of expectation as those clients are thinking, I can probably be a lot more self-service. When you superimpose things like augmented reality, where you can bring in some of the remote experts live through using an app, like for example, what CareAR is doing, you can look at, again, a simple example, your internet's broken, the router is blinking something weird, you're using an app to actually diagnose that problem, and that remote engineer can tell you what the problem is, and that can create some very quick resolutions. Similarly, I think augmented reality can empower some of the field people who are coming to site, whether that's an oil rig or it's a car manufacturer where there's a car problem and they have to bring people together. I think COVID has accelerated how you can use digital to empower some of those frontline users rather than waiting for truck rolls of people coming through to deliver that. A lot of efficiencies there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, it's nice to find a silver lining to COVID, isn't it? Like, because it wasn't easy for any of us. Just in regards to this is final question that's coming virtually. So it's talking about service management experiences. And how do they respond to the current inflationary economic situation and the environmental impact and net zero strategies? Very good question.
Yeah, that's a good point, because at the moment, I think if you look at inflation, there's a huge focus on everyone optimizing how they operating profit margins, but also clients expecting more. So if you think about when I talked about truck rolls, and I've mentioned that a couple of times already, if you can prevent those costs in servicing those clients, because you can't stop servicing your clients, and they're expecting more. If you can resolve those issues without all that wastage, that I think goes back to really the objective of making it a bit more operationally efficient. Same with the supply chains, all very much, I think there's a lot of challenges there. If you can reduce the expectation and dependency on that supply chain and logistics to deliver that experience through usage of some of this technology more pervasive through 5G into the end user or the front line, that all I think helps address some of the challenges or at least reduce some of them as well. Obviously, it's not going to help you reduce your fuel bill in the short term, but an organization that does count to a bit when you're talking about $200 to $1,500 cost per truck roll. Right? And from a sustainability perspective, the less you need to invest in terms of transport, moving things around, that all comes down to net zero, right? How you can reduce the amount of carbon you're influencing in just the logistics and the supply chain of your organization. So I think it all adds up it's all part of that conversation that you can think about. And I think it's very important to continue to look at it, because there are other players that are doing a lot more in that ecosystem that can contribute to that wider conversation as well.
Thank you so much, Kamran. That's everything that's all wrapped up. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Kamran Khan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.